first ball.
Tremendous catch, tumbling forward.
And he's bowled.
From the BBC World Service, in association with ABC and All India Radio, this is Stumped.
Hello and welcome to Stumped, your intercontinental hit of news, features and debate from the quirky world of cricket. I'm Alison Mitchell in Northamptonshire, the village of Wollaston. It's about 20 minutes drive from Wantage Road, home of Northampton County Cricket Club. They're playing a game against Yorkshire over the course of this weekend. There's been much change in English cricket since we last spoke to you on Stumped, with Joe Root resigning as the men's test captain. And there's a new managing director appointed as well for the England men's cricket. So plenty to talk about throughout the show. We'll get to that in due course.
Hi there, everyone. Jim Maxwell back here in Sydney after a spell up in Queensland over Easter. Probably the only thing of significance, if it's that, was the confirmation that Andrew McDonald is going to take over as coach of all three forms of the game. And that seems to be a very happy outcome, particularly for Pat Cummins. That's the man he wants, a calm figure behind the scenes who's got a lot of experience as a coach. And we'll see what happens next when we start playing cricket again.
Well, no major shake-up in Indian cricket so far. Hello, everybody. I'm Charu Sharma for All India Radio, back home in Bangalore, waiting this weekend for the start of the Khelo India University Games, a big new sporting initiative by the government following the success of the Khelo India School Games, which is this very large countrywide participation thing that the government started. And, of course, these are also to be the selection or the trials for the World University Games. So plenty for sports persons to look forward to. But as we all know, the IPL juggernaut continues to roll on, so more on that in the show.
Yep, indeed. Chara, Jim, good to see you both. We're going to start this week with arguably the most famous sportsbook in the world. The 159th edition of the Wisden Cricketers' Almanack has just been released, where the top cricket writers and broadcasters have been commentating on cricket and the extraordinary wider circumstances that dominated 2021. Now, the Almanack, which is known as cricket's little yellow Bible, been published every year since 1864, and it reflects on a year when Azim Rafiq forced the sport in the UK to examine more painfully than ever its attitude towards racism. The launch of the 100 gave a huge boost to the women's game, whilst raising just as many questions about the men's. And then in the last 2 months of the year, Australia's men won the T20 World Cup and retained the Ashes. Well, to tell us more, we're joined on Stumped by the editor of the Almanack, Lawrence Booth. Lawrence, welcome. Now, just tell us first of all, who are the two stars who are named the leading cricketers of the year?
Joe Root is the leading cricketer in the world. I know he's just stepped down as England Test captain, but he's got the gong for his batting. Had an exceptional year, 1,708 Test runs, the third highest annual tally in Test history. And Liz Lee of South Africa was the leading woman cricketer in the world. She scored more ODI runs than anyone, 630 odd, and averaged 90. So she was quite a straightforward choice as well.
There's the 5 cricketers of the year as well as the leading cricketers. And there's particular criteria about that, because you might look at it and think, well, hang on, there's no Australians amongst those 5. Surely they perform brilliantly. But tell us about the 5.
Absolutely. I've been fighting off people on Twitter all morning. It's an annual perk of the job. There are basically 2 main criteria for being one of the 5 cricketers of the year. You can only be chosen once, and the emphasis is on the previous English summer, and not everyone enjoys those criteria, but them's the rules. It's been going since 1889 as an award, and it makes it a bit quirky. It means that you're not just naming the top 5 cricketers of the year. This is Wisden's way of doing it. I think generally people understand it.
Lawrence, Jim Maxwell, yes. What are the names of the cricketers who have made it into this book, for good or bad?
Hi, Jim. Yeah, well, there's a powerful piece at the front of the book by Azim Rafiq, who in many ways was the man of the year for reasons that he probably would have wished wouldn't have happened. He, of course, raised several allegations of racism against Yorkshire, caused a big inquiry, and he really was the catalyst for lots of players of Asian heritage and African Caribbean heritage to talk about their own experiences. So he has forced English cricket to look at itself in the mirror and to ask whether it's really doing the best it can to make the game as inclusive as possible.
Hi, Lawrence. This is Charu Sharma from Bangalore, India. You've been fighting some people off on Twitter, but let me assure you, you'll get many more fans because of some of the top 5 cricketers that you've chosen out from this part of the world. So there's plenty of delight, I can assure you, because of Sharma and Bumrah. But you have, as always, written your editor's notes. And what were some of the key things that you wanted to highlight this year?
Hi, Charu. Yeah, just before I talk about that, the point about Bumrah and Sharma is quite interesting, because it's the first time ever, this award's been going since 1889, as I mentioned, it's the first time ever that 2 Indians have been together in the five. So hopefully that's something to celebrate.
Wow.
In the notes themselves, I mean, I lead on, it's unavoidable really, but I lead on what was a poor year for English cricket, both on and off the field. I mentioned the Rafiq scandal, which hung over the whole game, leading to the ECB chief executive, Tom Harrison, having to appear in front of a parliamentary committee to talk about the work that English cricket is doing to tackle racism. And of course, off the field, it was a pretty poor year for the Test team. They've now won one Test out of 17 after that recent defeat in the West Indies that brought about Joe Root's resignation. So what I argue in the notes actually is that last year the news emerged that Tom Harrison, the chief executive, and a few other executives were due to share a bonus pot of over £2 million for ostensibly for getting the 100 through. But my argument is that taking that bonus in the current circumstances with the game in such a plight is not appropriate. It's made a lot of people angry, and I've suggested that that money be given back to the ECB, either to re-employ some of the 62 staff who were sacked last year, or to be ploughed into the African Caribbean engagement programme, which has been run by Ebony Rainford Brent and is aimed at attracting demographics that have not previously felt welcome. So I think that money could be put to much better use than going in a few executives' pockets.
Well, quite obviously, English cricket's in all sorts of turmoil, and you mentioned a few of these points. But also globally, politically, we've seen Afghanistan in some sort of trouble with the Taliban moving in terms of cricket, the Afghanistan team, and also now Ukraine, although maybe less important for cricket, but there's some turmoil there as well. And how have you captured this on Wisden, if at all?
Yes, well, we have. We spoke to Tuba Sangar, who was, of course, a guest on Stumped. Ali interviewed her, I think it was last year, and that actually gave me the idea for getting her in Wisden. She used to work for the Afghanistan Cricket Board, and she was forced to flee the country when the Taliban took over. And she's spoken quite movingly in her piece in Wisden about hoping that the world doesn't forget the Afghanistan women's team, and also making a good point about saying if you ban the Afghanistan men's team, that won't necessarily have a good impact on the women's side. If the men aren't playing, the women certainly aren't going to be playing because of the Taliban's attitude. And you mentioned Ukraine. Oddly enough, we had a piece on cricket in Ukraine in our Cricket Round the World section. It was written before the war started, so you don't get much of a flavour of what was happening. I think some of the tension in the eastern part of the country is mentioned, but it was more about how cricket in Ukraine was growing. I suspect that's not the case anymore, and we don't know if that situation will ever improve, really.
I know Jim wants to come in, but just to pick up on the Afghanistan situation, it was interesting to note that the last ICC board meeting, of course, they've got this Afghanistan working group set up, and it shouldn't be something which gets sort of nudged off the agenda just because of time and other stories pile in. But it was notable that the ACB, the Afghanistan Cricket Board, confirmed their commitment to developing the women's game, and the board said that they will submit, quotes, a full action plan and budget to do so to the ICC's working group that's been set up. There hasn't been a time frame set on that, so I think it is something certainly to be keeping an eye on. Lawrence, thank you so much for joining us on Stumped. As Lawrence Booth, editor of Wisden Cricketer's Almanack.
From the BBC World Service, this is Stumped on ABC and All India Radio.
Well, the only constant thing about English cricket at the moment seems to be change. In the last week, we have seen Joe Root step down as captain of the England men's test side and a new director of cricket be appointed. We'll come to that in a moment. But first on Root, well, he has stepped down after 5 years in charge, citing the toll and the impact that the role has had on him. He led his country in a record 64 tests. He's overseen more wins than any other England test captain with 27, but he's also overseen more defeats as well with 26, including a dire run of just one win in the last 17, which really seemed to be the tipping point. But then you look at Root's runs tally, and it is extraordinary in the face of all of this. 5,295 runs as captain, the most by any England skipper. He scored 14 centuries whilst in position, and he's currently England's second highest test run scorer of all time, behind Sir Alistair Cook. So good news for the team, of course, that he's going to continue to play. He just won't be captain. Jim Charu, we have discussed this a lot, and particularly, Jim, in the wake of the Ashes defeat, that need for change. Are you only surprised in a way that he hadn't stepped down earlier?
Well, you might recall some time ago, I think after the 2019 Ashes, I was advocating that Ben Stokes should take over the captaincy when they next come to Australia at the least. But of course, circumstances affected the likelihood of that occurring. But I don't think there's any doubt that if he wants the job now, Ben Stokes should take it. because he's likely to give more inspiration and have a bit more nous tactical savvy than we've seen from Joe Root throughout all that time. I mean, I've always thought as great a player as he is, he doesn't quite have it as a captain, and that's unfortunate for a number of reasons around the amount of cricket, the bubbles, all this sort of stuff. But it's really come down to a lack of his tactical awareness more often than not, apart from the varying quality of the players under him and the amount of cricket that England have played. So, yes, where they go from here is a very interesting question. Do they have an interim captain now, or wait until Ben Stokes has got it sorted in his head about whether he can manage it? It's a very tricky one, like every other area of English cricket. Even though the England women lost to Australia in the final, they look to be in a bit better shape for major cricket than the men's team. And that can be said about the likelihood of what happens in the 100 too, which it strikes me there's probably a bit more focus and future for women than men, because to me the 100 for the men is irrelevant while their test cricket is in such parlous state. But, that's the manoeuvring that goes on about trying to get the game back into a place where people can watch it, because for far too long they haven't been able to, and that's had a big effect on the game. So Joe Root has been absolutely fabulous, and it's sad to see this occurred, but it's a good thing he fell on his sword, because I think the sword might have come out anyway.
And one thing about Rob Key, who's the former Kent's and England batter who has taken on this role as managing director, he's come from the Sky Sports commentary box. The Jim, something has been said about the fact that he doesn't necessarily have managerial sort of boardroom experience to step into this role. But, is that, I'd like to think that cricket generally teaches you a lot of transferable skills. He's certainly got, great ideas about the game, and he's shown himself to be a real thinker through what we've seen of him in commentary.
Yeah, well, I was certainly impressed with his work on the Australia-Pakistan series as a commentator, and I've heard him at other times. So he seems to have a good head and potentially the organisational skills to manage this role. But you just keep coming back when you look at English cricket at the instability of it all, right? Who's going to be captain? Who's going to be manager? Are you going to go back to having a chairman of selectors? How are you going to select a team? I mean, Andrew McDonald said quite openly the other day. He said he can handle all three moods of the game. Whereas in England, they're not too sure whether to have a coach for the test and another white ball coach. I mean, it's just all over the place at the moment. So I think it's going to be a while before you get some kind of stability there that's going to lead to a better performance. So Gary Kirsten's name, is his name still around as a coach? Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you, Jim, how much traction both Langer and Ponting have been getting in Australia. I can't quite imagine that Ponting, given his commitments with Channel 7 and with the IPL, would be interested. But he's certainly been a name that's been in the media here. Has that had much traction, or has Langer been focused on?
Not really. No, I think most people, most of the punditry is saying it's too soon for Langer to jump to that role after being Australian coach. And Ponting, well, you probably answered the question. He's probably got too much on his plate. They've been trying to get him into a role with the Australian team. So, no, I don't think that's feasible at this stage. Maybe some other time. But, yeah, that's the problem. What's wrong with Kirsten? The name keeps coming up. Why don't they go there? He's got a good record, has he not, Charu?
Well, in India, certainly. But this might be a fabulous opportunity, just to be a little contrarian, for England to go back to the manager ways. I mean, you have a batting coach and a bowling coach. I suppose they're important, and a fielding coach as well. But don't have a head coach. Just go with the manager and get on with it. Probably only to prove that it doesn't really matter. I mean, this whole coaching thing, I'd like to go back to Ian Chappell about getting you to the field. But instead of appointing somebody else and sacking him again, because there are just far too many sackings going on in English cricket. I don't think that's helping at all. And it might create just, a little bit of apprehension for somebody taking that job up, saying that, what am I supposed to do? Win every test match, or I'll be sacked in, half a year? So don't have one.
Well, look, I want to make sure that before the show ends, we've got time to talk a little bit of IPL, because the Indian Premier League is approaching the halfway mark. The last 5 IPLs have been won by either Chennai Super Kings or the Mumbai Indians. Yet, this season, those two sit bottom with only one win from 12 matches between them. Conversely, the new teams, which are the Lucknow Super Giants and Gujarat Titans, they're flying high, 9 wins out of 13. Charu, is this a sign that the tide is turning somewhat?
Well, if it is, thank God, because, we want newcomers, that's for sure. We want new winners and new teams doing well, new fans related to the new team. So all of that's good news for me. There is a fair amount of post-mortem about the auction that one was very famously involved with, where Mumbai and Chennai apparently didn't do themselves enough justice to take on new blood. So, yeah, there's a lot of churn now, but all of it's just post-facto. It's now too late for Chennai and Mumbai, according to me, to make it to the qualifiers or to the playoffs. So they're gone, and that's great news for particularly the two new teams, because one could easily have said that having joined in late, even though there's an equality process with the auction and there was a fairly good system to ensure that they got decent enough players, it could easily have been a situation where they were right at the bottom and then lamenting the fact that they've come in at great prices and haven't had the troops. But they're doing really well, which I think just points to, it's a good signal that the IPL's got the player mix or the remix right.
For Chennai and Mumbai, anything to do with Rohit Sharma's captaincy?
Well, there you go. He's considered one of the finest white ball captains, and he's the Indian white ball captain, and he was made that because he's done so well with Mumbai. So how does that change overnight? And once again, I go back to my theory about the captain not really making much of a difference, but unfortunately he hasn't led from the front. The runs have been dry, and Mumbai has been getting off to bad starts. So we can analyze that, more deeply. But the fact that he's not getting runs is a big problem for Mumbai. But in terms of captaincy, surely he hasn't sort of reduced in his ability to lead, and yet the team's right at the bottom. So how much do you then push on to a leader or a captain for the success of the team?
Well, that's all we've got time for on Stumped this week here on All India Radio. Don't forget you can follow us throughout the week on Twitter. We're at BBCWS Sport. Use the hashtag BBC Stumped. And watch us on YouTube as well. Go to the BBC World Service's YouTube channel. You'll find us there. My thanks to Charu Sharma and Jim Maxwell. And of course to all of you. We'll see you again next week. Bye-bye.
Stumped is a BBC sport production for the BBC World Service in association with the Australian Broadcasting Corporation and All India Radio.